He didn't know. That is the whole of it. Everything else in this story, the yellow jacket, the crowd, the voice, the summer night, everything else is detail. On the 9th of August, 1986, Freddie Mercury walked onto a stage at Knebworth Park in Hertfordshire and gave what many people who were present would later call the greatest concert performance they ever witnessed. He bowed. He walked off. He had no idea it was the last time. The diagnosis was 14 months away in a private room in Switzerland, and it would arrive quietly and change the meaning of everything that had come before it, including that bow, including that walk off the stage, including the specific quality of that August night that the people in the crowd have been trying to describe ever since. The 1986 Magic Tour was not a nostalgia exercise. Queen in the summer of 1986 were not a band trading on past glories. They were 39 and 38 and 36 and 34 years old. They had been making music together for 15 years, and the specific thing that happened when the four of them performed together had not diminished with time. If anything, it had deepened. The way that things made by people who have spent a very long time learning each other deepen. The set list that summer moved through 15 years of material, Radio Gaga, Bohemian Rhapsody, We Will Rock You with the confidence of a band that knows exactly what it has and exactly what an audience needs. The production was the largest Queen had ever mounted. Enormous stage, state-of-the-art lighting, sound that could fill a field the size of several football pitches without losing the detail of what was being played. And at the center of all of it, Freddie Mercury, short dark hair, full thick mustache, the yellow leather jacket performing every single night with a completeness that the people who watched from the wings described as something beyond professionalism. He was inside it, every night, completely. The crowd that came to Knebworth on the 9th of August was not a passive audience. They had been waiting for this night across the summer, in the specific way that people wait for something they already know is going to matter. They came from across Britain by car, by coach, by train, some of them on foot from the train station in the August heat, and by the time the afternoon had begun to lengthen toward evening, Knebworth Park held more people in one place than most cities in England. Not 120,000 statistics, 120,000 people with histories, with the specific songs they loved for the specific reasons they loved them, with the summer feeling already embedded in their skin from hours of waiting in the heat. When the stage lights finally came up and Freddie Mercury appeared at the top of the stage in the yellow jacket, the sound that came back from the crowd was not applause. It was something more involuntary than applause. It was the sound of a very large group of people recognizing something they had been waiting for. Brian May was at stage right. He has spoken about that moment, Freddie appearing, the crowd's response in interviews across the years since. He always pauses before he describes it, not for effect, because the words are not quite enough. What Freddie Mercury did on the Knebworth stage that night was not separable into technical components. You cannot analyze it as voice plus presence plus showmanship and arrive at an explanation for why it worked the way it worked. Peter Freestone, who had watched Freddie perform from the wings hundreds of times and who understood the specific mechanics of how he prepared and how he performed better than almost anyone else alive, described that particular performance in the years since as something that was different not in any single identifiable way he could isolate, but in the accumulated quality of all the ways at once. The voice was at its peak. The physical presence was absolute 39 years old. The yellow jacket, the mustache, the build, the specific command of a large stage that comes from spending your entire adult life learning how to fill one. The relationship with the crowd, the live, reciprocal, almost chemical exchange of energy between Freddie Mercury and a field full of people that was always the essential mechanism of what Queen concerts were, was operating that night at a level that Freestone has struggled across the years to put into language. He has said it was the most present he ever saw Freddie. Not the most theatrical, the most present. There is a difference between those two things, and the difference is everything. Halfway through the set, during Bohemian Rhapsody, something happened that nobody in the crowd had planned and that nobody on the stage had orchestrated. The crowd sang it back. Not the chorus, the whole thing. From the operatic section onward, tens of thousands of voices producing the harmonies that Freddie and Brian and Roger had spent days layering in a studio in 1975, now coming back at the stage from a field in Hertfordshire 11 years later. Freddie Mercury stood at the microphone and listened. His expression in the footage is specific, not surprise because he had heard crowds sing his songs before. Something else, the expression of a man who understands in that moment what has actually happened with something he made, what it became outside the room where it was made, where it went. He listened for a few seconds. Then he opened his mouth and sang it with them. Here is what nobody in that field knew. Here is what Freddie Mercury did not know, standing at the microphone listening to tens of thousands of people sing Bohemian Rhapsody back at him. He had 14 months. 14 months from that moment to the private room in Montreux, where the diagnosis would arrive and reorganize the meaning of everything. Brian May has described what it was like to watch Freddie from stage right at Knebworth in a way that is different from how he describes watching him at other concerts. He has described it as watching someone at the peak of something, not the peak of a career, which is a commercial measurement and which had been passed and surpassed several times already. The peak of what a person can be when they have spent their entire adult life developing a specific ability and have finally arrived in this specific hour, on this specific stage, at the point where the ability and the moment are perfectly matched and there is nothing between what the person can do and what they are doing. He has said in a 2021 interview that is among the most honest things he has said publicly about the Queen years, that he knew something was happening that night. Not what was going to happen next, not the diagnosis, which was still 14 months away, still undiagnosed, still forming silently in a body that showed no sign of it, but the specific quality of what was happening on that stage. He has used the word perfect. And then he always pauses. The pause that contains the year that followed. At the end of the show, Freddie Mercury stood at the front of the Knebworth stage, the yellow jacket, the white towel he had taken from one of the crew around his neck, the 2-hour sweat of the performance still on him, the specific physical residue of having given everything to a field full of people. He bowed the way he always bowed, the theatrical full-body bow, one arm extended forward and one held behind his back, holding the position for longer than mere courtesy required, because this was Freddie Mercury and he did not do anything halfway. Then he straightened. He looked out at the field, at the faces in the front rows, at the mass of people extending back into the August dark further than he could see in the stage light. He raised one arm, he waved, and then he turned and walked toward the wings. Brian May was a few steps ahead of him, his large curly hair catching the dying stage light. Roger Taylor was coming down from the drum riser, drumsticks in hand, already talking to someone on the crew. John Deacon was already at the side of the stage, moving efficiently as he always moved efficiently. They walked off together, the four of them, in the specific way that people walk off a stage after a great show, the adrenaline still in the body, the crowd noise behind them, the singular quiet of the wings after the house lights go up. None of them knew. They were just going backstage. It was just the end of the show. He walked off. The stage went dark. The crowd began to move toward the exits. And somewhere in that ordinary dispersal of a great concert's ending, something that would never happen again stopped happening. Nobody noticed. There was nothing to notice. It was just over. Peter Freestone has described what came next in the dressing room with the care of someone who understands that the ordinary quality of those post-show minutes is itself the point. There was no speech, no ceremony. Freddie Mercury came off stage and sat down, and the process of coming down from a 2-hour performance began in the way it always began, the specific domestic routine of a touring life, the removal of the yellow jacket, the change of clothing, the food and drink that Freestone had made sure was waiting. He was quiet in the way he was always quiet after a show, not sad, not reflective in any unusual way, just coming back to himself from wherever a performance of that scale takes you. Freestone has said there was nothing about that evening, in its ending, that suggested it was different from any other night on the tour. The greatness of the performance was visible from the stage. From the dressing room, it was just another night after a show. The Magic Tour ended. The band went home. The summer of 1986 gave way to autumn, and then to the long indoor work of recording the miracle sessions that were themselves already beginning to operate under a different pressure, though nobody yet knew why. The autumn gave way to a winter and then to a new year, and then to October 1987, and with it a private meeting in a room at Mountain Studios in Montreux. And Freddie Mercury sat across from Brian May and Roger Taylor and John Deacon and told them what a doctor had told him. The room went quiet in the way that rooms go quiet when something is said that permanently reorganizes the meaning of everything before and after it. And in that silence, the Knebworth concert, the yellow jacket, the bow at the front of the stage, the crowd singing Bohemian Rhapsody back, the walk-off through the wings into the ordinary August backstage acquired the retroactive meaning it has carried ever since. It became the last one. Not because Freddie stopped performing immediately he recorded. He made music. He gave everything he had to making music until his body would not allow it. But the specific version of him that had walked onto the Knebworth stage in August 1986, at the absolute convergence of everything he had spent his life becoming, did not walk onto a stage of that scale again. The terms changed. The last great night was already behind him, and none of them had known it was happening. Watch the footage. You can find it. The yellow jacket, the crowd, the bow. Watch his face in the moment when the crowd sings Bohemian Rhapsody back at him. Watch what he does with it. Then remember what you know that he didn't know. That is not information. That is grief. The Knebworth concert was filmed and has been released in various formats across the decades since. It is the most complete visual record of Freddie Mercury performing at his peak, and the people who work with Queen's Archive have described the footage in terms that converge on the same thing, that it is difficult to watch without the knowledge of what came after changing the texture of every frame. Brian May, who contributed to the restoration and release of the footage, has spoken about watching the final edit in ways that describe the specific experience of being present in a room with something that is both a celebration and an elegy simultaneously. The performance is there, complete, undiminished, exactly as it was. And around it, in the knowledge you bring to the watching, is everything that came after. The diagnosis, the recording sessions that were built against a closing window, the final albums, the last photograph, the November morning in 1991. None of that is in the footage. All of it is. He walked onto the Knebworth stage on the 9th of August 1986, and he gave everything he had. He always gave everything he had that was the specific quality that Brian May has spent 3 decades trying to describe, and that Peter Freestone has spent the same 3 decades calling simply presence. He gave everything. The field gave everything back. And when it was over, he walked off the stage in the yellow jacket into the English summer dark, and he had no idea it was the last time. And the not knowing is what you carry when you watch the footage now. Not the greatness of the performance, though what he did that night was as great as anything he ever did. Not the scale of the crowd or the production or the perfect weather or the specific quality of a summer night in 1986 when the most important band in Britain played the biggest show of their career. Those things are real and they are part of it. But the thing you carry is the not knowing, the complete, absolute, unguarded freedom of a man performing at the peak of his life with no knowledge of what 14 months contains. He walked off. He went backstage. He had no idea. And now you do. And that is the whole of why this hurts the way it hurts. That is the thing. That has always been the thing.